Hey everyone, welcome to another episode from Pro Engineering. This is going to be pretty exciting. We have a box from Shapeways. Really can't see that, there it is. And in the box we have, let's see here, this piece, and ooh, that's not for this episode. This isn't either. That is, and that is, and that is, and that is. What is all this? Well, that is the interior to the Axial SCX10 to Ford F100. I do have a mock-up, well, at least a mostly mock-up interior here. Let's take a look at what we got in the packages, as well as some of the pieces that we're going to use from this. What we have here in front of the F100 is the entire interior set for this truck. Everything here is available on Shapeways, and I'm probably going to put it on my mini factory, but I haven't quite gotten that far yet. And you are going to have a number of options. This seat, which is going to be by far the most costly piece, is available in SLS nylon. And the quality is absolutely spectacular. I really can't even hardly see. I can see some of the stepping right there, but that's about it. So this is the main unit. These are the mounts that you're going to get right here. These are for the left and the right, and they do go on the left or the right. They're not interchangeable. This is the firewall. And the reason why I separated these pieces out instead of having one entire bucket is for painting as well as cost. Perhaps you want to 3D print the entire bucket, but you want to have higher resolution for the door panels, so you can do that. These are printed in the Polyjet, which is the ultra detail plastic from Shapeways, as is the dash and all of the instrumentation. So I'll get to that in a moment. The left and the right door panels are here. Again, the dashboard is here, and what off-road performance truck would be complete without a roll cage? So that is the main cage, and the cage also has the seatbelt straps here across the bar at the rear, and then you've got your little rear view mirror. The instrumentation is going to be pretty ambitious in this project. So there's your main cluster right there. It's got all the numbers, it's all laid out. It's got the little stars across the center where the speedometer is. This is illuminated by 2 LEDs. These are trim pieces, this one here and this one here, that will trim and set back the cluster, so you can also put a lens in front of it. This is the Ford emblem for the steering wheel. Where's the steering wheel? Oh, I left the steering wheel at work. These little guys all right here, they're a little hard to see because the key fob is in the way. And yes, that is in fact a Ford key fob with a key in the ignition. These are little knobs, and most of them are the same, but this little guy is different and it's curved. This one goes on the end of the dash. Here we have our door cranks and our window cranks, tachometers here, and the shift light. Now they happen to be attached, but as you can tell by looking at the tachometer enclosure, you do have to cut this off and install them separately. The tach is keyed in the back. You can see the little notch right there, so it won't rotate, but the shift light can go in any way you want. And yes, these will also be illuminated. And again, we're going to be a little ambitious here. These are the auxiliary gauges with 2 3mm LEDs to light them up, and the auxiliary gauge housing. So this will be a lot of little detailed parts, but the first thing that I want to do is go ahead and prime everything. When you have the nylon printed plastics, this stuff sucks up paint. So in order to get this a lot smoother than it currently is with the texture, we are going to paint this with about 5 coats of an automotive high build primer. After 5 coats, we're going to sand down the primer, not the nylon. The nylon does not sand. It gets kind of fuzzy and weird. So we don't want to sand the nylon, we want to sand the paint. We'll do the same with the door panels, but because these are the ultra detail plastic or the Polyjet, we won't have to be as aggressive with the primer, maybe 2 coats. And the same with the dash. Unlike the nylon, this stuff really responds well to sanding. So we'll sand it down a little bit, ignore the little screw that I have sitting up here. Sand it down a little bit, give it a few coats of primer, and we'll be ready to paint. For the dash detail parts, the cluster, the auxiliary gauges, and the tachometer are the only ones that you need to prevent getting paint on the rear side, especially in these 2 holes for the 5mm LEDs, these 2 holes for the 3mm LEDs, and these are going to get some micro LEDs. So cut these off the sprue and then tape them down with tape on the backside to a piece of cardboard or something, and then paint them with 1 coat of metallic silver if you can. Silver is critical because that will allow light to refract from the silver and bounce all around inside of these and get a more even distribution of light from the front. And then you want to paint them in the color that you want the gauges to be. And in my case, I will have a black faced gauge. I do have some of the interior pieces painted. The door panels have been done in their two-tone, and then a coat of matte clear gone over that. And I'm going to use my silver paint pen to trim this embossed edge, and I'll do the same thing on the dash. I suppose you could use a chrome paint pen, and the reason I'm not doing that is I've just had bad luck with those, kind of dumping out all their chrome into a large area, and I don't want to repaint this. So let me do that, and then we'll come back and assemble these doors. So this is my sprue that I painted in chrome, and we'll get our flush cutters. For the door panels, we're going to grab the window cranks. You can see that window cranks have the little bosses at the back, and that's the cranks and the door handles. So we're going to grab the entire stock. So snip it right here. Now these have been painted in chrome, and be careful, because if you paint these chrome, or really whatever you do paint in chrome, and the chrome is incompatible with clear, that if you clear coat after doing this, that the chrome will end up giving it a silver effect, not chrome. And that's why I've clear coated these prior to installation. I'll start with the door handle, and we'll drop that in, and we'll put it at a just slightly greater angle than the armrest. And then the window crank can go in whatever angle you want. And I'm kind of a fan at making the driver's side and passenger side a little bit different. So given the number of coats of paint that I've applied to these, you've got about 2 to 3 coats of paint on the door, not including the couple clear coats. So it's gotten kind of a little bit of a press fit. In the back, we're going to apply a nice cement. Glue here at the rear. I didn't put it at the front because I didn't want it to squish out onto the paint. Next, we'll move on to the buttons and trim for the dash. So to be very clear, this little one here is the one that goes way on the outside on the slight curve. So if you look at it from the side, you'll see that it has a slight contour to match the curve. This is the key with key fob, and it is attached with a standoff here, as well as a standoff there. So you want to trim that off first. But before you do that, you probably want to paint it, not just in chrome. This is the ashtray and glove box. They're both the same. They're just a little shorter. And the remaining 5 fit these 2. And I believe these 3, I'll double check the images, but they'll fill up these 4, and one of these is for the ignition key. Just to be clear, I've seen quite a number of discrepancies on which switches and knobs go here and in what order, but according to the images that I found that were the most stock, at least from what I could tell, we're gonna put 2 of these knobs here in the first 2, then the ignition key, and then one of the other knobs, and I believe that one is the cigarette lighter. And then on the other side, we'll do the remaining 2. And as with the doors, we'll snip these off a little bit low, and then they can be just pressed in. And be incredibly careful if you're using the ultra detailed plastic from Shapeways, because although it has enough strength to handle being inserted, you do not want to apply any lateral load on these, because they don't accept shear very well. So there's 2 and there's 3. Cool. And remember that we'll glue it from the rear side. Nice. Let's put that corner one in. So for this one here, just make sure that you get the angle correct. You'll want it to conform nicely, and it should be a perfect fit. So you can see from the side there. Cool. And then the last 2, glove box and ashtray. The key I haven't put in yet because I still have a lot of work to do to this dash. And I just believe that this probably isn't the most durable looking thing on earth. So we're going to wait and install that last. Next, you probably should get around to detailing the cluster. The next thing I want to do is assemble the instrument cluster. To do that, you're going to need the main cluster. This is the inner spacer, and this is the outer trim. You're going to use the inner spacer, and in particular this thinner edge, to allow you to trace the lens on a 0.5 millimeter thick piece of Lexan. And because the trim piece is quite thin, you're going to have to get this pretty spot on. That's probably not going to be possible using a scissor or X-Acto knife. What you'll probably end up doing is getting it close and then slowly sanding it down to fit. The first thing that we're going to do is continue to detail this cluster out. I did paint this completely in matte black, but to be more specific, I painted it silver. and then I painted it matte black, but first masking the holes for the LEDs because we don't want to block those at all. Then I went in there with a very, very small paintbrush and painted the silver trim. You can see all of the numbers are present, but they're all painted. So what we're going to do is take some 1500 grit sandpaper, take our cluster, and very, very lightly place it down and just kind of run it back and forth. And what this is going to do is sand down all the high points, so it'll knock back the indicators. These are the turn signal indicators here. It'll knock back the needles, and eventually it'll get down to the numbers. So again, do not really apply pressure on this, because if you apply pressure, you could kink it over and wear through a corner, and then you'd have to start over again. So just go back and forth very lightly. To make sure that you've got it done correctly, I've plugged in some LEDs, and I really apologize. It's not showing up particularly well here, but in person, so this is like a big mass of white. That's not how it actually looks. In person, I can very, very clearly see the 80 and the 90. I can also clearly see the indicator, this needle, that indicator, this needle, but I cannot see 0 through 70 particularly well. So a few more passes and then it should clean those up, and then we'll be good to go. Since we're sanding gauges, we might as well do the tachometer and the auxiliary gauges. The auxiliary gauges are pretty straightforward, so we'll just do that exact same thing. Okay, just doing our test lighting. You can see that those all light up quite nicely. So that is done. The tachometer is not so straightforward. So this is what you're going to get from the package. In fact, I might change a couple things in the production model, but roughly you're going to get this. This is the tach and this is the shift light. We are going to snip the tach free, and do not lose the shift light. So the tachometer cannot be installed in the wrong orientation because you've got the little key right there. We'll sand this down, and there is the tachometer. So the shift light is the interesting one. We're going to snip off this little thing here in case we don't need the sprue. And then we can go ahead and clean that up a little bit. Obviously being very careful that we don't stab ourselves. Okay, so that is clean. And you can see that the shift light will fit right in this hole. Right, so this other tiny little piece is the shift light. So we'll go ahead and sand down the front, and I should have not painted the sides, but I did. So I'm going to sand down the sides and clean that up as well. To detail these, I'll get my Sharpies, and I want to do all of the numbers in green. What I usually do is do a couple of passes, check with the LED, let it dry, and then come back and do a couple of more and kind of layer it a little bit. Next, we'll do the turn signals and the auxiliary lights here, the charge lights and all that. They're looking really, really bad on camera. They do not look like this in person. It's just having difficulty focusing. So I'll do I'm sure one of these is the temp. Kind of split that up a little bit with the green on the bottom. Yeah, I really wish you could see the actual look of this. It's not displaying the way it's supposed to. Yes, this area is a little too bright, but what we're going to do when we put the LEDs in, I'm not going to use these. Normally I'll paint the tip of them silver, which reduces the hotspot and helps to allow that light to bounce around a bit more, but we're not too far off. Done the same with the auxiliary gauges and then the tachometer. All right, now it is time to assemble this. The first thing I'm going to do is put in the spacer from the rear. Please note that these parts are very, very thin 3D printed plastic. And if you heavily hose down your parts in paint, they may be too thick to fit easily. So just make sure that you don't have to sand something down or clean something up prior to installation. You don't want to force anything. And next we'll get our Lexan. Make sure it is clean. This is a one-shot deal. Okay, this is nice and fingerprint free on the inside. The outside will change shortly. That is in. Then the trim will go on top of it. And this should be, I'm just test fitting it right now because I'm curious how easily this will fit, whether it'll stay in by itself, and no, it won't. All right, this is going to be fun. I was worried about this. What we're going to have to do with this, I believe, is apply some very thin cement along the perimeter, press it in place, and hold it there until it dries. So that is going to be absolutely awful. All right, I've applied some liquid cement on this surface, so I'm going to sit here while it dries. I used a very, very marginal amount because super glue tends to bloom. That's that white fogginess that is created. And that was the last thing I wanted to see all over the glass. So I put a very light amount around the perimeter, and that really came out nice. So that was kind of worth the headache. Shove some temporary lights in there. Again, these are not the ones that we're going to use, but let's just see how it looks. Okay, cool. I do want to install the housing next. I'm a big fan of making this removable, so my plan is to use shoe goo around the perimeter. Since we're here just shoe gooing away, let's assemble the auxiliary gauges. So this is the orientation that they're going to go in. The little bosses are upward, and you want to make sure that the needles are mostly pointing up. The little dots at the bottom, which are the indicators, whether it's a oil pressure or ammeter, those are at the bottom. Those should just slot right in here. And you can see the look that we're going to get. We can drop these here. And for those, I'll use liquid cement on that. These are Model Masters. Okay, just a little bit on the perimeter on the back side, and that'll wick its way inside. And we'll do the same with this. Here, you want to go a little bit light because you don't want it to leak out the front. Just like that. Let it sit there a little bit and cure. So for this next bit, we're going to wire in the shift light as well as the tachometer. And to do this, we're going to start with the shift light. And this is one of these really small probably 2.5 millimeter LEDs. Let me just try and make this visible. This little guy right here. And we are going to thread this in. I know it doesn't look like a hole, but the shift light actually does have a little hole on the inside. And we'll get some tweezers and we're going to pull this through here. There we go. I just realized there's a little knot that came with it there. So I don't know if that's, oh, it does fit. Okay. So we're going to fish that straight through that little hole on the inside and pull it all the way. It's a pretty long cable. All right. So it is in there. We're going to have to plug this in and actually light it up before we complete this because we need to make sure that the LED is facing the correct orientation. To do that, we're also going to have to run the cable through that hole there. So we're going to push that LED down, and I think it's actually in the right orientation the way it is right now, but we got to double check. I'm using this voltage converter here set to 2 volts because this yellow LED requires 2 volts. We'll turn it on, and it does look like it's flashing on camera. That's just because of the refresh rate of that LED. But as you can see here, our shift light is in fact in the correct orientation. Just push it down a little bit more. And we'll double check this diffusion by installing the shift light cover and not touching anything. There it is. Nice. So now what we have to do is glue it in place. Speaking of gluing things in place, this is the tachometer that will drop into that shortly. You can see in the back that, and we're back. You can see in the back that we do have this little channel, and that is to accommodate the wire there. So we'll just make sure that it does kind of fit this orientation. But what we also want to do is grab the white LED. You can see this is so hard to move around. Okay, that is where the white LED's front is. So we're going to just drop it in here and glue that in place. Make sure, see, I've got it upside down. You want it glued right there because right on top here, this little notch, that is to align it in the housing right there. So make sure that you glue it right here and then we can install it. The LED has been glued to the back of the tachometer. And now before we install it, we'll put a little bit of a couple of dabs of cement in there. Obviously this is a one-time deal, so you better get it right the first time. There we go. We'll line that up and press it in. You may need to rotate a bit because I think it's crooked. How are we going to rotate? This is why we're not using super glue. There it is. Because if that would have been super glue, we'd have been done. The real bummer about this is that when it's off, it's going to look, well, like that. But when it's on, it should look pretty darn good. And let's give that a go now. Bump this up to 3 volts. Usually white LEDs are between 3 and 3.3. These came in at 3 to 3.1 volts. So let's just go with 3. Let's separate the black, and there it is. Looks a bit brighter on camera, but it looks pretty good in person. Pretty happy with that. Now that the tachometer is wired up, so I'm going to run the wires through the hole in the dash. Okay, and this is the wire for the tach, and then the second wire that I'm going to put in, I folded it so I know which is which, because if I wire these incorrectly and send the 3 volts to the shift light, I'll blow it up. Turn that around. That should just press into place. Be careful here. You don't want to press too hard and crack anything at this stage in the game. Just like that. Tilt it just a bit, and there is our tachometer. On the inside, I'll use some modeling glue to hold that in place. And then we will wire up these LEDs. And we are finished. If I flip this over, you can see that there's 1 or possibly 2 wires over here. This has been wired up so that if I can show you this here, I'm out of red wires, unfortunately, which is very irritating here. This is the ground for all of the LEDs minus the shift light. This lead here, this second green one, is the hot lead for every single LED. And this other green wire, because I'm out of black now, as it turns out, is the ground coming off of this right here. You can see this one coming out right there. That is the ground for the shift light. This means when you close the circuit, i.e. attach this to this, it will illuminate. Now we're going to use some liquid electric tape and cover up all the LEDs here to prevent light bleed. The next sub-assembly I would like to focus on is the steering wheel. What we're going to do here is make it so that the steering wheel can actually turn, but if this is not something that interests you, you can obviously skip this step and glue it all together. I have this metal rod that is just under 3 millimeters in diameter, and it is 66 millimeters long, and you want to cut it a little bit long because we can always trim it down later depending on how you're going to make it actually connect to the servo. The steering wheel, it's important that it has a little bit of a friction fit. You can see that I can push it in here, and the reason why I don't want it loose is because it'll make it a little more difficult when it's curing. So there you go. The steering wheel is 2.75 millimeters in diameter, and to get that hogged out a little bit for the shaft you're going to use, I just take my X-Acto knife, place it in here, and very carefully just kind of run it around. Please be careful because, number one, you don't want to apply too much force if you go ahead and get the ultra detailed plastic and crack this, although it should be plenty strong enough for this. More importantly, you don't want the knife to slip and cut you because these are incredibly dangerous. So the first thing we are going to do is connect the wheel to the main shaft here. And please note that the central horn button is hollowed out on the back. So this can actually protrude just slightly. I'm going to get a shim. A washer will work, but I happen to have this shim, which is a bit too large on the ID, but that's good enough. And then that'll all go straight through this mounting hole, just like that. And then here at the rear, we can control the steering. The first thing I want to do is glue these together. I don't want to put glue on it and then assemble it because it could definitely glue everything together. So make sure you glue this prior to installing it. Now that the wheel has been glued in place, I will grab the shim that I'm going to use. Again, a washer will work. I just figured that this will reduce the gap. And again, it is far too large of an ID, but it's going to work fine for this application. Slide this down inside. Okay. And now at the rear, we have to put a collar on it, and I'm going to use one of these servo savers, just cut off and glued on. Before we do that, we have to install the entire column into the truck. There's also the horn button that's going on last. So in order to put our column in, we should reassemble all of the doors. So these will just line up with these holes here. And we'll give it a little bit of a push in the back side, right where the little tabs are, and that will seat it just nicely, just like that. Okay, if you are using the ultra detailed plastic on these door panels, make sure that you apply a nice even load. Don't force anything. Okay, those door panels are in. Next, we'll install the passenger side. Once these are put in, you're going to want to use a little bit of model glue along all these outside edges to make sure that it is securely installed. Next, the front panel will go on in the exact same fashion. So just line up the little tabs, 1 and 2, glue those in place there, and then you'll want to put a bit of model glue right in there as well to make sure that these are all locked in place. I've used a couple little clamps here while it's drying, and we'll check back after the recommended cure time. The firewall is now glued in place. It's nice and durable. And next we'll drop in our dash. The dash has 3 mounting points. It's going to slot in to these little tabs on the side for either end of it. It also has this part right over here. When you're working with the dash, you want to be careful because you don't want this to break off like mine did. And that was because this is an in-house print and it wasn't doing particularly well. The layers really weren't bonding that great, which is fine for the overall size, but for these little parts, it wasn't particularly good. So I may just fill this entire thing in for the production model. So that will just drop in there and there. Okay, so that's in, and that is going to want to line up a little bit better like that. And as before, we're just gonna have to glue everything. Everything is glued in place. I did not bother gluing this down here because this is really only here to prevent the dash from sagging over time. This way it'll just lock it in place and also prevent this thing from flopping about. Now that we have our steering column, and I took the wheel and the shaft out of there, we can slide it right in here, and you can see that. We'll turn it around. If you look at it from the rear, you can see that the shift linkage should sit flush, but also come through the hole, and the steering linkage piece should come all the way out, just like that. And that should be just about as far as it goes. You don't want to put too much load on this, too much pressure, because you don't want to crack the retaining part on the dash, nor do you want to break anything on the column after you've done this much work. To prepare the operational steering, I've got this servo horn here. This is for a smaller servo, but that's going to work fine. I'm going to drill this hole out to 2.5 millimeters because the shaft is 2.8, and then I'll use a X-Acto knife to just slowly hog that out until I get just under that, so I can press fit that on there and then glue it in place. All right, so the hole has been hogged out on this, and I also wanted to note that I put a bunch of little flats on this. The reason for that is this metal bar is very smooth and, well, very round because it's a bar. So putting these little flats on here is going to give the glue something to actually bond to, and not only that, even if the bond does break, because there's these flats here, it's not simply going to give up the ghost and start rotating. The next bit here is I'm going to glue this on, and that's going to be a little tough, so I'm probably not going to have film footage of that. So I made some modifications to this end. I used a lighter to bend it up slightly, and I would say at about a 45-degree angle. And then I used a very small ball stud. These can be found in a lot of Tamiya kits, just to give you an idea. The shaft is 2 millimeters and the ball diameter is 3.7. I'll use a corresponding ball cup and then bend my own wire to attach it to the servo. Before we mount the servo, this little plate here isn't intended to have the servo sitting directly on it. Obviously the geometry isn't quite conducive to that. Therefore, I put this plate here as just a starting point if there's a better way that you think to place a servo if you don't want to use it at all, because the actual geometry that I wanted here was going to be quite large and bulky, and I felt that it would be unnecessary for certain people. So what I just did is put a little plate, and I cut another little piece of this is actually the center console from my 79 Ford, and I'm going to glue it right there, and problem is solved. It may look like a little bit of a hack thing that I did here, but I can assure you that the actual piece that I wanted here added almost $10 to the print cost. There have been a lot of design features that I did on this entire interior. For example, the fact that the doors, the dash, and the firewall are all separate to help to drop the price of the actual prints from Shapeways, as well as make it easier for you to print it at home. Okay, you can see that I've got everything pretty much set up here. I've got the servo, and I'm sorry that I can't show this better here, but basically I'm going to cut the link that I made here and then just glue it inside the ball end and then double-side tape the servo down. The reason why I've got the link going through the horn in the reverse side is because it's going to allow me to move that servo slightly forward more. So let me cut this, glue it in place, attach the servo with some tape, and we'll be back. Okay, I lied. I just wanted to show what the plan was. So it is basically that. We'll just glue those together and then we'll be all set. Here's my little ball cup, and there's the VHB pad for the servo. We'll assemble all this stuff and maybe have some steering. The servo has been installed with the double-sided tape. This is a 3M VHB that I like to use. Everything's hooked up, and we'll go ahead and use our little servo connection tool and go on auto. Put it on manual. And let's see how the wheel looks. That's never gonna get old. I guess now we can put the horn button in. So here is our little guy, and we can use a high quality model glue, put it just on the inside lip right here, and then press it in. And then this will go in vertically, and this will be a one-shot deal. Now that the steering wheel is in, we need to do two things. We have to install our ignition key, and we have to install our roll cage. We need to cut this off from 2 points back here, and then, so we'll cut the one off the key fob here. Let's get rid of this. We'll cut off at the back of the key fob right there. And then at the base right here, it's very important that you don't cut. Oh God, it fell on the floor. It's okay. God, that's so cool. Look at that. It's the most ridiculous thing I've ever designed. All right, we don't want to cut this off, obviously, because then we can't glue it into place. And speaking of, I have to try and do this with all of you watching me. This is never going to happen. How am I going to do this? Let's hold this with the tweezers. And we'll come over here and we'll, okay. Oh my gosh, that's just awesome. And then from the back side, that's the third one. Oh God, it's of course the one buried between all the wiring right there. Can you see that? We'll put a little dab of adhesive. I think it got it. We'll never know. But anyway, there's our key. The roll cage has 4 mounting points here at the bottom, of course. Drill these out with a 2.5 millimeter drill bit, and you can tap it then with an M3 tap, or you can use a self-tapping screw. If you use a self-tapping screw, I highly recommend over drilling these to like 2.65 because I don't want these to crack over time if you force the screwdriver in here without clearing it properly. So if you are going to use a self-tapping screw, just go ahead and thread it in, back it out, and kind of do it a few times so that the threads cut into the nylon and prevent overstressing. Now to install the mounts that hold the entire interior in place, remove the rock sliders, and then we're going to have these mounts. Now yours are going to look different. Yours will be straight up and down. These are prototypes that of course were necessary just for evaluation. On the bottom, you're going to want to, and this one's got some schmutz in it. On the bottom of these, you're going to want to drill this out with a 2.5 millimeter drill bit and then use a self-tapping screw if you have one long enough. I don't, so I'm going to tap this with a M3 bottom tap and then just drop this guy right on place. You will note the Ampro logo is not there for decor. It's there to let you know that that arrow points forward. As you can see on the other side, it's upside down. So if looking at the car like so, you want to be able to read Ampro in this orientation. If not, this little cutout here at the rear won't be in the right spot and it'll interfere at the back. So we'll just push those all the way in place. They're a little bit snug, and then we'll use our M3. With the mounts installed, we're ready to drop in the interior. I used 20 millimeter long M3 machine screws. And just note that you do want to clean these holes out here, the mounting holes, with a 2 millimeter drill bit. Even a 1.5 millimeter bit will be fine. There's just residual powder in there from the printing process. So we'll just drop this on here. For the electronics, I have the servo wired into the steering using a Y-splitter. That's it. And for the shift light, I found this switch here that was in a drawer, and basically with the switch in the resting position, it is open. When you accelerate the servo here, we'll close the circuit and the shift light will turn on, and this is the plug we're going to use for that. Simple as that. And this plugs in somewhere. Maybe here? To hold down the interior, I've got these cotter pins here. These are probably a bit too small. Actually, that might not even work because the back of the body comes here, so I think we have to go in this way. And then we'll just cut off whatever's hanging out this side here so it doesn't scratch the body. So let's go ahead and turn this on. All right, so the car's lights are on. It looks like the shift light is on, but that's only because of the overexposure. Let's accelerate. Oh. Car's starting there. And let's floor it. Other lights are visible right there. There's 3 of them right there. Okay, now just to see how this works, I'm not going to unplug the sound box, so sorry about that. When I accelerate, For everywhere minus full throttle, it doesn't actually close the circuit. If you floor it, you'll hear a click. And clicking is that on. So the body will pivot straight down like it always did. There's no interference or anything. It just drops straight on like it normally would. Here you go. There's the interior. Got the dash. The lights are on it. Seats, all that good stuff. Now I don't have the drivers yet, so we see that it's got the little seatbelt loops there. What will fit in here very nicely are the drivers from a Tamiya Bruiser. These are drivers from the Tamiya Bruiser, and believe it or not, they will drop straight on in there. This was purely coincidental. I mean, genuinely, all by accident. Let's see if his arm reaches. The arm's gonna need some work. Yeah, arm's gonna need some work, but otherwise the body fits in there pretty nicely. Let's see how the head fits. Which body did I put in? I put this body in. Okay, so that fits right in there quite nicely. So that will complete the installation here. I'll have links in the description, as well as all the part numbers, and these will be available on Shapeways as well as My Mini Factory. A couple of questions that you may have is, do you need the roll cage? No, the roll cage is not really part of anything other than for looks. The steering wheel probably isn't necessary either. If you just use a Bruiser steering wheel, you can fab up your own steering column. That'll save you some money there as well. I mean, there's plenty of things here that you can do to simplify the build for sure, especially if you're not going to be as crazy as I was with the shift light and all the other lights, as well as the steering wheel. That'll probably make things a little bit cheaper. How's that steering wheel working there? And there's our steering wheel right there. And that is the complete interior kit for the Axial SCX10 with the Ford F100 body. So thank you all so much for watching, if you're able to make it through this ridiculously long video, and we will see you next time.